goes nothing. All right, Rogelio, this is the first time I'm recording a podcast, and let's have some fun. All right. I still don't have a name of the podcast.
Okay.
We'll figure it out sooner rather than later. But the first person that we're going to talk about is Isaac Babel. Now, Isaac Babel, actually, his life is best outlined with the history of Russia during the early 20th century. Russia underwent massive upheaval, and though I want to make this podcast about topics such as writers' lives and either celebrate or denounce them, the work they did and all the specific books, literary movements, and general things about literature, I believe historical context is always necessary when discussing these topics. The events that occurred between the time of Isaac Babel's birth and his death are inseparable to what happened in Russia. Furthermore, Babel's Russian and Jewish identities are indistinguishable from him and his life. It will become more apparent later on why, but a quote from one of his daughters explains it pretty well. Now, quoting Natalie Babel from the collected works of Isaac Babel, which all of these quotes are pretty much from, quote, "As a Russian writer, he expresses both nostalgia for the old world and desire for the new. As a Jewish writer, he was well-versed in Hebrew and the Talmud. Yet he wrote in Russian. His work reveals what many have called a Jewish sensibility," end quote. However, when he used the typical schemes found in Yiddish literature, they were always interwoven with Russian cultural archetypes. The real end quote. Excuse me. So it may seem paradoxical to many that one can have two separate identities based on the laws and customs of the country if one completely forgets about things like apartheid or segregation. Him being Jewish will, of course, affect him throughout his entire life, and that is something that I'd like to call foreshadowing, the foreplay of literary devices.
That's a good way of putting it. I appreciate that. I'm going to learn a lot of, literary devices hanging out with you. It's good.
So, are you excited to get into his life?
I'm very excited to get into his life.
Mm-hmm. Before we start, I want to put one more note about him, is that it is important to know that Jews were not allowed to live freely in the Russian Empire and were restricted in areas dubbed the Pale of Settlement. So, quite a lot of what he's going to do moving around is going to be illegal pretty early on. So, pretty wild. On June 30, 1894, Isaac Emanuelovich Babel was born in Moldovanka, which is a poor district near the harbor of Odessa.
You're doing great with the names.
Yeah,
You're doing great.
it's
Keep
gonna
going.
be pretty tough. His mother was Feiga Babel, and his father was Man Yitzkovich Babel.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good.
Later, they relocated in a small village about 150 kilometers, which is 93 freedom units, outside of Odessa. Around the time of the move, they also changed their last name from Babel to Babel, which is just feels way correcter with the mouthfeel,
Yeah.
Babel.
Yeah, I mean, it looks a little more official. It's weird to see it as Babel and then to read it as Babel here. All right.
Well, like most non-Americans, he studied many languages, including English, French, German, and of course, he was fluent in Russian, as the city of Odessa was part of the Russian Empire at the time. And speaking Ukrainian was really not widely permitted in schools, even in the parts of Ukraine that we know today. It was really just primarily spoken in families that were considered ethnically Ukrainian, or Polish families that were living in Ukraine at the time, or other ethnicities that were Slavic. Babel also took private Hebrew lessons. And if you know anything about the Russian Empire, you're probably going to see some red flags pop up with Babel's religion. Because you see, Babel was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I've said that a couple times. It's good. It's going to affect him later on.
Okay.
In 1905, when Babel was around 11, two events occurred in the Russian Empire that could have had an early impact on Isaac's life. The first was the October Manifesto and the subsequent constitutional reforms set in place by Tsar Nicholas II. These reforms were the better part of two options, allowing at least on paper a guarantee of civil liberties such as freedom of speech, press, and assembly, and created an elected legislature legislative body called the Duma. I won't get into too much, so here's an interview. Here's an overview.
Okay.
I'm interviewing you right now, it feels like. But the Russians went to war with the Japanese in 1904. Racism dictated that there was no way a white nation would lose to an Asian nation. The Russian Navy was absolutely humiliated and obliterated from the face of the earth, which caused diverse social groups within the empire to demonstrate their displeasure with the Tsar. These demonstrations culminated to an event called the Bloody Sunday Massacre of 1905. It was called that because it occurred on a Sunday in 1905.
Okay.
And
Following the logic here. Very nice. Russian straightforward.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
And historians can be very literal. Hundreds of unarmed and mostly political protesters were killed or wounded by the Tsar's troops right in front of the Tsar's winter palace.
Jesus.
And angry workers, farmers, and even soldiers responded by striking throughout the country. They formed worker-dominated councils called Soviets. So that's where we get the Soviets name from. Yeah, right?
What?
Isn't that crazy?
That's wild. I mean, and that's in 1905. That's not really like that long ago in the grand history of that country.
No, that's
right.
That's really not. I mean,
whoa! I had no idea.
Yeah, which is pretty wild, and that's going to be very important from this story.
Okay.
Obviously, the Soviet Union is coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think like right around the corner.
Yeah, the second event that occurred was a wave of pogroms across the Russian Empire. I'm going to say pogroms. I don't really know the actual. I think it's pogroms, but
okay.
Forgive my actual way of pronouncing this. Whatever.
I don't know any different. I think if you keep it consistent, people will forgive you.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it inconsistent.
Okay, that sounds good.
Do you know what a pogrom is?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you're going to hate this.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
A pogrom is defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as, quote, an organized massacre of helpless people.
Holy shit.
Specifically, a massacre of Jews.
Oh, my God.
I know.
What?
I know, right? And it's difficult to understate.
Helpless people. That's the part that... Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
And, specifically of Jews.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty wild that we've had this for centuries, and people don't really understand it.
Yeah.
Well... It's difficult to understate now just how widespread anti-Semitism was all throughout Europe, and specifically the Russian Empire at this time, but in Europe it was pretty fucking crazy. These are just a list of some pogroms in Russia that happened. It's some of the serious ones in which Jews were killed and wounded, and Jewish houses and businesses suffered substantial damage. These occurred in 1821, 1859, 1871, 1881, and 1900. And with the exception of the last year, these all happened before Isaac was born. Yeah.
Wow. Whoa. Okay. I mean, it's like one every 20 to 10 years. That's like wickedly weird, like predictable. It's like that's...
Yeah.
I mean, that's like almost like a generation of people, like in each cycle that like learned that hate,
And I don't mean to belittle how it is. It's usually a couple of dozen people dying whenever it happened. But you think about destruction in a sense of like an entire district of people. It just had lost all their entire livelihoods.
Yeah,
they just their stores, their feeds, the way they feed their animals and their kids. It's just like completely destroyed, and then they would kill a couple dozen people as well. It was like a village riot. It wasn't anything close to other kinds of serious like massacres that we're going to be talking about shortly. But
but they're still notable enough to make it into the history books.
I mean, they have a whole definition of a word that was specifically for this. Moving on, the Kishinev pogrom in 1903. Which occurred in 64 towns and 626 smaller villages, mostly in Ukraine and Moldova, killed about 47 to 48 people. This was believed to be agitated by the Tsarist secret police called the Okhrana. In July 20, 1905, a pogrom was stopped by a self-defense group, leading to only one man being killed. So, these groups literally think people with pitchforks and some guns.
Got it.
Yeah. a pogrom in Crimea in 31 July 1905, a mayor ordered the police to fire at one of those self-defense groups, killing a bunch of people. Lastly, the one important to the story, after the publication of the October Manifesto, pogroms erupted in 660 towns, mostly in the southern and southeastern areas of the Pale of Settlement, which is the Jewish settlement, just reminding you guys.
Yep.
These occurred because Jewish people were seen in visible opposition to the autocracy,
Okay.
thank you, of the Tsarist regime. It's almost certain that the Tsarist government had a hand in this, specifically the Okhrana. The Tsarist government probably did the most to spread anti-Semitic rumors out of any government in the world at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's other governments that we could talk about that happened very shortly after this.
Yep.
But it was all due to this cryptic book called The Protocols of the Elder Zion. And if you want to learn more about it, we'll talk about it afterwards. Babel's family were not directly impacted by these pogroms in a way that I know personally.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody was hurt from his family. But he's definitely witnessed them. And it's difficult to imagine how he wouldn't see this death and destruction at a young age not impact his life. The following year, Babel's family moves back to Odessa. His father did well for himself as a dealer in agricultural equipment, and his family was able to elevate themselves. And he grew up in what would be considered a middle to upper class family lifestyle to this day.
Okay.
This is noteworthy because during his writing career, he would write how he grew up in poor neighborhoods and impoverished. This was a purposeful image he wanted to portray, but it's not factual.
Okay.
And Odessa quickly became his home. This is how Babel himself viewed Odessa. Quote, "It was the most charming city of the Russian Empire. If you think about it, it is a town in which you can live free and easy. Half the population is made up of Jews, and Jews are people who have learned a few simple truths along the way. To a large extent, it is because of them that Odessa has this light and easy atmosphere." Any questions so far?
Well, I feel like the setups there, his family's becoming successful along the way. They're sort of easy living, which to me is not always the theme of living in Russia back then. There's nothing. I mean, in my limited knowledge of history of Russia back then, that's impressive that especially particularly in Jews in Russia, they were able to carve out that lifestyle for them. So that's pretty impressive alone.
Yeah. And I'll say this is the Russian Empire, not just Russia. It's part
Russian
of Ukraine,
Empire.
but yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, it's we won't get into too much of politics about it, but yeah, it's why there's some certain factions within the Russian government trying to invade a sovereign nation right now is because of something that happened 100 years ago. Yeah, more. Well, now it's time to talk about Babel's education in his early writing career.
Okay.
Babel wrote as a child, but there's nothing really super special about it. His first attempts of writing stories happened as early as 1906 when he was around 12. Many of his early writing was in a literary form of French because of his influence of, and bear with me on this, Guy de Maupassant, whom was considered a master of short stories. Babel even writes a story with the title of the guy's name.
All right.
And his idol was Gustave Flaubert, who was a leading exponent of literary realism. And those are two of the big influences that you're going to get with Babel when reading him. Babel early on doesn't get widely or even minimally published from what I can find, which means he had a very normal youth in his writing career. According to himself, he doesn't consider his writing career to really begin when he was 30 at 1924, though he published a bunch of stuff before that. It was just, he wasn't really famous.
Okay.
That's what he said.
Got it.
Like I said, he first published his first story at the age of 19. This story survives and is called Old Schloim.
Schloim.
Is what I presume.
No, I agree with that. I'm looking at that text. Schloim.
Yeah.
I like it.
Isn't it? It's also written in Russian, so this is where he starts.
Oh, okay.
It's a story about a decrepit old man who didn't leave his village for 60 years, and one day the village is invaded. The invaders force him to change his religion to avoid eviction from his hut. His family, who lives in the hut with him, and also is considering conversion, are figuring out how to get rid of him because he's being stubborn as hell. So he gets up in the middle of the night and hangs himself.
Oh, no. Oh, man, I laughed too soon. That was not good. Oh, no.
Really enlightening stuff.
Wow. And why did he, I mean, what motivated him to write something so dark? Is that just the attitude of the time? Is that?
I mean, yeah, Russia, but also like, you know, it probably happened to somebody, or at least like wasn't. Yeah, this kind of
Dang.
stuff. Fiction is a mirror of reality, and he loved realism.
Yeah.
Um,
Dang.
Before we get ahead of ourselves, though, in 1911, Babel attempted unsuccessfully to enroll in the University of Odessa. It was unsuccessful because they had restrictions on how many Jews can attend the school, something that never happened in the U.S. Harvard.
Right.
Sorry, clearing my throat here. Instead, he attends the Institute of Finance and Business Studies in Kiev. Now, if you're following the timeline, some shit's about to happen in Europe around this time, particularly this thing which I believe at the time was referred to the blowing out of Archduke Ferdinand's brains in its subsequent tussle.
All right, that's more straightforward, just naming of historic events. Dang. All right, let's go.
Yeah, and in 1915, his school was evacuated from Kiev.
Shit.
Yeah. Well, he does graduate and moves to St. Petersburg, which he was not really allowed to do because, again, he was Jewish and was outside the Pale of Settlement. So he's right now, literally, his existence is being illegal.
Got it.
However, this is also 1916, and again, some shit's happening in the Russian Empire at this time. It was unclear if he was able to get away scot-free, living a pretty normal life, or if he was in constant surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
But he was living under Russian rule, the Russian Empire rule, that was in serious turmoil. What is clear is he meets and becomes a huge fanboy of a very prominent writer at the time called Maxim Gorky. Remember that name.
Okay, Gorky.
Gorky
Got it.
is his pen name, and it literally translates to bitter.
Damn.
Just about as fucking Russian as he could get.
Yeah, that's good.
He was a well-known writer, a socialist political figure, and particularly, he was part of a movement that you may have heard of called Marxism.
Oh, I know that one.
We made it here.
Yeah.
Let's
Woo.
go. Ding, 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 ding. If we don't do anything else with this podcast, we touched on Marxism, the very first one.
Right off the bat.
I know.
Well done. Wait, can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
You could say it has left its mark on history. Oh. Wow.
Whoa.
All right. I'm here all week.
Yeah, this is your house. You can't leave.
All right. After Marxism, now Marxism is here. Okay, great.
Yeah, we get to talk about the socialist revolution in one of the least apt and least direct ways. It's like removing the fat from whole milk. Get it? Because we're skimming it.
Whoa. All right.
I know, we're fucking killing
Oh
it.
no, that's too many. We gotta pace ourselves here.
Yeah,
That's
you can't be
good.
drinking too much fucking skim milk. It doesn't matter
No.
how much fat's removed from it. All right. We won't dwell too much on Gorky because if this podcast goes anywhere, we will actually talk about him eventually. He was a fascinating story and is not a nice person at all, in my view. He was an apologist for the gulags. He was exiled multiple times from multiple different governments within Russia for many different reasons. And he wrote that, and this is going to be homophobic, so bear with me.
Yep.
He wrote that homosexuals should be prosecuted severely within the Soviet government because they were an abomination. All right, passing that Gorky, but he will come back again.
Yep.
For our purposes. Suffice it to say that he was massively influential on Babel in starting his writing career. Babel's earliest work in 1917 was published in a literary journal that Gorky was actually the one publishing. One of his works in that journal was called The Bathroom Window. This got him in trouble that same year. He was charged with writing pornography.
Oh, okay.
But 1917 wasn't a
Right.
good year for Russia, and a little porno was the least of anybody's concerns.
People weren't for smut writing back then.
Nah, they were.
I mean,
They liked it,
yeah.
and they just thought porno was a little bit less porno than it is right now. And I wrote here, this is a little bit anecdotal,
Sure.
but a history professor of mine, well, I guess a teacher, was high school, said that revolution almost always comes with an increase of porn distribution, like a massive increase. And I don't know what it says about our society now, that porn can be accessed anywhere at any time, but some things in life don't really have to have lessons, right?
That's a
The bathroom window,
That's cool.
the story, is pretty
Yep.
mild. Because of course it is. The summary I have, it's really short.
Yeah.
I think it's like 3 pages. It's about a man paying a madame of a house to climb up a ladder to voyeur on one of the sex workers while she was with another client. He falls off the ladder in the end, and everybody laughs at him. It's a very entertaining read.
That sounds good. You got what he deserved, I guess. Or maybe, whoa. All right. Straightforward. I like it.
Yeah. So it's 1917 in Russia. You're Tsar Nicky the Deuce. WW1 ain't going too well for you.
Yep.
People are really very, very badly mad at you, and you're pressured to abdicate the throne. What do? Well, in February, he does exactly that, and a provisional government takes hold of the country. This is about the same time Babel decides he wants to volunteer on the Romanian front of the war.
Damn.
I know, right? What a ballsy move to try to go into the Romanian front of the war as a Russian at 1917 after hearing everything that's happening over there.
Yeah, that's nuts. Will we talk about his motivation for that, or do you know what that is?
No, we're just going to pass by it because he doesn't get to go there.
Oh, okay, got it.
Because the Bolshevik Revolution
nuts.
happens in October,
Ah,
igniting the Russian Civil War only a month later.
damn.
Instead of going to the Romanian front, Babel decides now that his talents are wasted, and he makes a career change. You want to guess what he thinks his talents are best for? Just take a wild guess.
Is it glass blowing?
Oh, it's pretty close.
Oh,
You want to take a second one?
Does he become a? I don't know. Does he become a? I don't know, man. Well, no, they had it in planes. I was gonna say pilot. Does he become a plumber?
Oh man, he would have done a lot better with his life then. No, he joins the first form of the Soviet secret police called the Cheka.
Holy shit. Okay,
Yeah,
that's wild.
he does this briefly, granted, as a translator in the counterintelligence unit.
Whoa, that's wild. That's super wild to me.
Yeah, I know.
Dang.
So he's full in. He's
What?
into the Russian Revolution. Yeah,
Did they just disregard his Jewishness at this point?
it didn't matter at this point. No.
Everyone.
At this point, we could talk about it a little bit more, but no.
Yeah.
Being that he's already living illegally, he's not really famous yet with his writing, but they need people. You know, the Soviets need a lot of people. I mean, I think this
Gotcha.
art is definitely alive at this point. Yeah, it's 1917, 1918. So, yeah, they're overthrowing a bunch of stuff. The Soviet Union, as we know, does not exist.
Okay.
It's
Got it.
it's a lot of councils. It's very confusing. You know, we'll touch about how confusing it is. But
Yeah, that sounds good.
yeah, no. And a shit ton of men are dying. Like the Russians between World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
It's unfathomable how many people fucking die.
Yeah, that's the one part about the whole World War I, II history that I forget. It's just like, tens of millions of people. Just like that in itself is just its own, class by itself. It's my limited understanding of Russian history
Yeah.
and European history in its context.
Yeah. Well, in 1918, the following year, Babel starts becoming frequently published in an anti-Leninist paper. At this time, where dissent was kind of tolerated, but just barely, so people got away with it. The anti-Leninist paper was also organized by his pal Gorky. Gorky. The Soviet Revolution had a myriad of mind-fuckingly confusing revolutionary philosophies that, unless you take years and sometimes decades to study them, you really won't understand the complexities of the differences. To grossly oversimplify. So many people had so many different ideas. The loudest and most brutal voices were the ones that ended up filling the vacuum of power. Coincidence? You sound like anything you know? Also, these people were pretty intelligent, but they had some pretty bad ideas too.
Big time.
This is not a political podcast, but it's fascinating to learn.
Yeah.
Which we want on this podcast. So, moving on. Babel stops working in the Czech at one point. I don't really know when. And during the next couple of years of the Civil War, Babel works in the Food Requisition Detachment Department, or just some food requisition detachments. Presumably, he was taking food from poor and starving people to feed the Red Army, because that's what they did. He moves back to Odessa as well and falls in love. He marries Evgenia, I don't know how this is pronounced, Gronfine on August 9, 1919. That's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, 3 kids all at once, just one shot? That's pretty impressive.
He didn't have kids yet. Yeah, I don't know where you got 3 kids.
Hold on, did he say he had?
No, he just married somebody.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
He
He does have 3 kids, which is, I don't know how he got that one.
Yes, I got it. All right. Maybe I was one of those kids in a past life. You know, what is
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
We're going to learn about how many kids with how many women he has. He's
one of those.
He is a lot of those.
Dang.
Yeah. So the next year, the Odessa Party Committee, a Soviet committee, issues him some war correspondent credentials under a pseudonym, and bear with me because this is very Russian.
Okay.
Kirill Vasilevich Lyotov. That's my best guess.
Okay.
And he is signed to, and you're going to need to know his name, Budyonny's Cavalry Army. Budyonny is the one you need to do, and I think that's
Budyonny's Cavalry Army.
Yeah.
Okay. Budyonny.
And he leaves to the Polish front. You may be asking yourself, why change his name? Well, there's an explanation, quoting Peter Constantine from the Collected Works, I believe. Lyotov was the identity that Babel assumed in real life as a way of surviving among the fiercely anti-Semitic Cossacks of the Red Cavalry.
Oh.
And he survives. And also, you might be asking, the Polish front.
Yeah.
Isn't WW done by now in 1919?
Okay.
Don't the Reds have their own civil war to worry about?
Don't they have their own civil war to worry about?
Yes. But the communist revolution can't spread globally if you don't make the workers of the world unite, even at gunpoint. Now, this isn't that absurd to think that other nations may revolt under a communist banner, especially at this time. There was a really strong leftist government in Germany at certain points, and one of the initial aims was to reach Berlin and to start a revolution there.
Gotcha.
But the thing about fighting against somebody in a brutal war for about 4 years is you typically don't have pleasant feelings for one another. And the other thing is you should know for this episode about Polish people is that they really, really, really don't like Russians, especially when they're being invaded by them. Fucking stereotypical of those people, right?
Yeah, 100%. How could they? You know?
So the Soviet-Polish War commences. Poland was just reemerging as a country after 123 years of non-existence. It doesn't really matter what you think of a people, but basically anybody who has been gained their independence will fight for something because now they have something to lose.
Yeah.
Thankfully,
Right.
that was the last time Poland has ever been invaded by the Soviet Union and will never, ever fall under the yoke of their influence again. But I digress.
Again.
Again. And again. And again. And again. Babel was with the Red Army for much of these conflicts. It was his time as a war correspondent that ultimately brings him to his peak fame and leads to his ultimate demise. See? That's what we call foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. There it is.
Man, it's really hot stuff, isn't it?
It is so hot stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
So after his time as a war correspondent, Babel finishes writing what would eventually be known as the Odessa stories, which are snapshots and in the day of the life kind of type stories based in Odessa. Yeah, they're the first ones in the book right there.
Yeah, I have the book right here, and now I get to take a look and hear. Whoa! Oh, Red Cavalry Psych. Oh,
yeah, we'll get there.
it's like they're in order. oh, you put this in order here. That's okay.
Well, I didn't put that in order. The person who
Sorry.
published it.
Wait, does it say the red cow? No, you put
Yeah.
your notes here in the. Oh, this is cool.
Uh-huh.
Oh, dang. All right. I
Uh,
have another book to check out when I'm done. The other one you gave me that's still sitting on my bookshelf.
Oh, no worries. I do that
Anyways.
a lot, don't I? So a lot of the Times publications didn't have like a far reach because things like the internet or internet marketing or
Yeah.
internet bookstores or
Right,
bookstores like in general weren't really much of a thing. I mean, there were definitely bookstores, but
Yeah.
many of these publications didn't achieve great fame because of geographical boundaries.
Right.
So the Odessa stories weren't very famous at the time. Babel would begin writing stories about his time traveling in the Red Cavalry, and these would eventually become collected in a work called the Red Cavalry Stories. Coincidence? No, clearly not a coincidence. And these were published originally in avant-garde publications, magazines, newspapers, I believe. Something different from the Odessa stories was that their reach was actually spread pretty quickly, and his star starts to rise. And with that, the rise to fame, that dude in charge of the Red Cavalry, Budione, begins to attack Babel's work as slanderous.
Dang.
Right away, basically.
Dang.
This is also happening around the same time as the death of Lenin. Stalin then ascends to power to the detriment of pretty much everybody in the world that ever existed.
Yeah.
For
It's
a few people.
understated. Holy shit. I mean, just this. I'm looking at the book here. When you say short story, I mean, I'm looking at some of these in this book. What, 7 pages, 6 pages, 9 pages here.
And those are some of the longer ones. Well,
I would just think that the shorter stories, physically and logistically would be able to have a further reach, because you'd be able to get that publication out there. But, I often forget that the advent of modern day logistics is really new and that they couldn't get these stories out there. But enough so that he could get slandered pretty much right away.
well, something to think about, too, is that you only have a limited amount of space within a newspaper, within an avant-garde publication.
Right.
You
And
know.
only so much money to make that happen, too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, he's probably not making a lot of money off of this. There's not a lot
I
of...
didn't think about that
Yeah.
at all.
Um,
So this is, must have been as much passion as it was, anything else. I assume. I mean, that's just there's a lot of individual stories here.
Oh, yeah. It actually took quite a while to read that. There's only like 300 pages, but we'll talk about a little bit of his style.
Yeah.
Within the next couple of years, many people start to leave the Soviet Union because of Stalin's ascendancy, including members of Babel's family, like his mother, sister, and most importantly, his wife. These people saw the writing on the wall and knew that the country they were living in was a very dangerous place, and this was after the insanely bloody revolution that they just went through. They were also living in Ukraine, which, again, Stalin hates him some Ukraine. Just does not like him that. It can't be overstated. In 1926, the Red Cavalry Stories is published as a book. This skyrockets Isaac's fame. He becomes one of the most, if not the most, famous writer in the Soviet Union at this time.
Whoa.
This is a quote from his daughter, Natalie Babel, describing just how famous he became. Quote, "The young writer burst upon the literary scene and instantly became the rage in Moscow. The tradition in Russia being to worship poets and writers. Babel soon became one of the happy few, a group that included Soviet writers who enjoyed exceptional status and privileges in an otherwise impoverished and despotic country. He was allowed to travel abroad and to stay in Western Europe for relatively long periods of time. In the late 1930s, he was given a villa in the writers' colony of Peredelkino, outside of Moscow. No secret was made of him having a wife and a daughter in Paris," end quote, right?
Wow.
And this is many years later, and she's not even born at the time that he begins this.
Oh, dang. Whoa. Oh, that's incredible, yeah.
This fame truly did provide privilege and status in the nation that was closing itself up to a terror-filled dark time even by Russian standards. He could have left the Soviet Union. Maybe he wouldn't have been safe anywhere else, but his wife and most of his family were already gone, and he decided to visit them that often enough. He probably was able to stay in Western Europe safely, but he never did. Now, what was it in the Red Cavalry stories that were considered so slanderous? In one story called Zamość, which is a Polish name, which literally just translates to bridge, it's a story of war crimes done arguably by both sides, and is the story that admits they lost the campaign. In truth, this is kind of inconvenient, but this is also, we're talking about Stalin's Russia. Stalin's Soviet Union. So this is a story called The Commander of the 2nd Brigade. This is the one where I found could be the most slanderous to General Budyonny in action. It's also 2 pages long. It may not sound like it, but the general thought of this story here was it was defaming his reputation as a strong leader. Quote, General Budyonny, in his red trousers with the silver stripes, stood by a tree. The commander of the 2nd Brigade had just been killed. The general had appointed Kolesnikov to replace him. Only an hour ago, Kolesnikov had been a regimental captain. A week ago, Kolesnikov had been a squadron leader. The new brigade commander was summoned to General Budyonny. The general waited for him, standing by the tree. Kolesnikov came to his commissar. The bastards are closing in on us, the general said, and his dazzling grin. We win or we fight like dogs. No other options. Understood? And those are only the first 2 lines of it. Granted, it's 2 pages. There's nothing really in there that I think is really all that slanderous.
Yeah.
He lost the campaign and got mad that somebody was writing about it. Poor him, right?
Yeah, poor him. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it? That's what got him in trouble, is just that?
There's a few stories with him in there.
Okay.
Most of those Red Cavalry stories, even with the general that we were talking about, are very, very small. No, there's very little detail. I mean, even then, Babel had the wherewithal to understand that he couldn't write what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't. And he tried to censor himself as much as possible. Well, almost immediately after his wife left to live in Paris, Babel starts an affair with a liaison called Tamara Kashirina. In July the following year, they have a son together named Mikhail.
Dang. Okay.
Yeah, number 1.
Wow. All right, number 1.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Babel starts to expand his talents past short stories and fornication. He writes his first play. He also writes a screenplay and begins to entrench himself in the Russian/Soviet film industry.
Whoa, that's wild.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. I thought you had misspoken there. I was like, screenplay? What? Like, okay, yeah, those are early on. Way early on films.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Some of the earliest films there are when it comes down to actually writing dialogue and screenplay, right? Well,
yeah.
I don't know, actually. I can't say completely, in fact, that's the case. But, I'm sure somebody, if they ever listen to this and if we can become famous, they're going to, fact check it and be like, well, the first speakeasy happened in 1897, and it was this guy and that guy, which I encourage you. Please do that. I would love that.
Yeah.
So, at this point, there still wasn't severe censorship that we all know and love under Stalin.
Yep.
But his work in film is absolutely going to bite him in the ass. So is the Red Cavalry stories. You see, the one thing about film that differs from writing is how approachable it is to literally everyone. There are great subtleties in art and film. I don't disagree with that. But writing can be a medium that is very subtle and challenging in places, specifically in 1930s Russia, where a not so insignificant portion of the population is illiterate, and even those literate people can't understand all the subtleties.
Yeah.
He becomes more famous in a way that he really starts to scare people out of the reach of his voice. Also in 1927, he leaves Russia for the first time for Western Europe. He sees his wife, and afterwards, seeing his wife, his daughter is born in 1929.
All right.
The one that we're quoting.
That's number 2.
That's number 2. But just because he is sleeping with his wife doesn't mean he isn't sleeping around.
Yeah.
He has another affair on his way over when he was stopping in Berlin, and there are a lot of names being thrown around here. But what is important about this woman is that she'll become the future Mrs. Nikolai Yazhov. I don't mean to diminish this person because, there's just a lot of names, and frankly, I couldn't pronounce hers.
Got it. That's fair. I probably won't want to be able to either.
When he returns from his trip, the general that we were talking about before resumes his attack on the Red Cavalry stories, with Gorky finally turning coat and becoming an advocate for the general.
Dang.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
This guy really doesn't like the popularity of Babel's work, and he uses his influence to cast shade on him. This is also around the time that the Red Cavalry stories are published in English, starting a very long tradition of Soviet writers being published in English with their lives going immensely wrong afterwards. There are a lot. There are
Really?
A shit ton, buddy.
Oh, I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
That makes some sense. I mean, at that point, so is it because most of our non-communist countries are all English-speaking at that point? And we're just getting these ideas outside of Russia?
No, it's just like they don't want to hear about what's going on in the Soviet Union.
Okay, got it.
So
they want to keep that illusion up.
Yeah.
Got it.
Somebody can argue against this, but whatever. I think Russia has a pretty fertile and elaborate and deep literary history.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually nobody can argue about that. That's pretty established. So even during the Soviet Union, when people are writing in Russian, that didn't change.
Got it.
They just didn't want people to know what the fuck was happening in there.
Wow.
Yeah. Even something that was
Wow.
as passive as the Red Army stories or Red Cavalry stories. So he makes more movies, some screenplays, and writes throughout the 20s and the 30s. And more people, because of this, start accusing him of anti-Soviet sentiment. He returns back to Western Europe again in 1933. He sees his daughter, who he had with his actual wife for the first time, which is really nice. He travels a bunch throughout some of the most beautiful parts of Europe, like the French Riviera and Austria during the Depression, just to let you know just how big his status was and how much money he actually was making, kind of.
Yeah.
During his travels, he collaborates with a famous double agent to make a French movie, which isn't as nice.
Whoa.
In 1934, he visits the Donbass region in Ukraine, which he probably almost certainly saw something called the Holodomor, which I'm sure he saw the Holodomor. I'm going with that pronunciation. This was an event of purposeful starvation by the Stalin regime of the Ukrainian population.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Millions die.
Yeah.
He becomes increasingly critical of the cult of Stalin after this, and in the many years under his regime, seeing some terrible shit.
Yeah.
Did you see that one coming?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty understandable, right? At this point, he's going to speak his mind. He does what he wants, it sounds like.
I mean,
that's nuts.
as much as you could possibly do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the Holodomor
Mm-hmm.
is one of the most reprehensible things that happened under the Soviet Union, and that is fucking saying something. And
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, what happened was, I think it was Stalin's daughter, who he loved, told him to quit his fucking shit and stop doing it. It was either his daughter or his wife, but I'm pretty sure it was daughter. It was like, you got to stop starving the Ukrainian people. Jesus. And it's like, okay,
Jeez.
in one of his fucking drunken binges at the time, probably.
Yeah.
All right, well, back to Babel.
Okay.
Cheer is
Babel.
He returns to France in 1935, and then for whatever reason, he returns back in the beginning of the height of the purges for this during the Stalin regime. Now I'm quoting his daughter again. He knew very well the nature of Stalin's character and the private life that he led, and had no illusions about Stalin's monstrous intentions and character. So you may be asking yourself, why did he return? Why did he keep on returning? Really,
Yeah.
what the fuck is going on here? The simple explanation comes from Babel himself. I'm a Russian writer. If I do not live with the Russian people, I would cease to be a writer. I would be like a fish out of water, end quote. It was fame and money, in my view. He wouldn't have been able to support his family in the same way he was doing, plus his many kids with multiple women. He made a lot of rubles, but he was also always broke because he was supporting his wife, daughter, children, mistresses. Monetary necessity made him stay in the communist regime, which is ironic when you really fucking think about it. His daughter also provides another reason why he stayed in the USSR. His inability to imagine himself as anything but a writer played a critical role in his refusal to leave the USSR. His stays abroad made him understand that he could not make a comfortable living as an emigre, end quote. He was just beloved and accepted in Moscow. And that was just comfortable there.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Just it's a comfort thing. The money bit or fame definitely helps, but I can see being comfortable, especially with so much responsibility in your life. You just need a constant. It's pretty bold, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
And who knows if his writing might have not have ever gone famous in France. It's like the 30s, right? Like that is also tough competition. We'll talk about how many fucking people were living in France at the time.
Yeah,
it was not a place to live if you didn't want to starve as a writer.
Got it.
A lot of people were living there. Well, remember that guy Nikolai Yezhov? You know that guy.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy, Mrs. Nikolai Yezhov.
Right.
Yeah. Now the husband of one of his old affairs.
Dang.
Well, he becomes the head of Stalin's secret police in 1936.
Okay. Oh man. Okay.
And that same year, Gorky dies.
Whew.
And even though he betrayed Babel in some points,
Yep.
Gorky was one of the last advocates he had in Russia. He basically lost all his influential friends.
Got it. I think I see where this is going. All right.
Well, Babel has another daughter at this time called Lydia. With another person he's having an affair with called, I'm not going to even pronounce the last name, but Antonina is her first name. He continues to publish some work, but his output has become to decelerate.
Mm-hmm.
Babel's fame really was at a peak with his screenplays and his writing, years before him. He was also added at this point to basically what the who's who of the Soviet Union was. And I'm adding this quote just to express that even though Babel became one of the hottest young bucks in Moscow, he was still Jewish, and anti-Semitism was really deeply ingrained in the Soviet Union.
Right.
There was just a narrow sliver of time, very, very minute, that he was able to get famous during the social upheavals of the Russian Revolution and seized that time for himself. Quoting his daughter, Natalie, again, quote, shows what he was striving for and what he in fact achieved. Moreover, it is astonishing to note that the date publication, the year 1937, when the ground was very shaky for Jews and intellectuals, it seems that when the books were already printed in March, the publishers did not have time to revise the contents of the encyclopedia according to the party's latest interpretations of Soviet history. They did, however, manage to glue by hand an addendum of corrections into each of the 61,000 copies of the first volume before they were distributed, explaining the need for the revision of several of the articles. The entry on Babel was neither corrected or removed.
Wow.
You got to give it to the Soviet regime.
Yeah, 100%. That's dedication.
61,000 is fucking...
Jesus Christ.
That's probably like 2 days' work of work for them, and probably 2 months worth of work.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Fuck! I can't say you got to give it to the Soviet regime. That's really fucked up.
A little bit, but we get it. Yeah. I mean, okay. Yep.
So now at this point in Soviet history, the show trials of political and military leaders are really being ranked up. Let's go, buddy! Ding, ding, ding! Books and lit and art is being heavily banned. People are disappearing, literally being erased from all history books and public records. People are turning snitch to save themselves, and often this doesn't really work out for them. This is being fueled by basically one man's paranoia.
Yep.
Do you want to take a guess? Who that man was?
Does it start with an L?
It definitely doesn't, but you could say that.
Okay.
I mean, any guesses? It could be Oscar the Grouch. It could be, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, if Oscar the Grouch is on the table, then it's definitely him. He's sus of everyone. Absolutely.
It's fucking Stalin.
Dang.
That guy Yezhov
Yep.
is one of those people that gets arrested. He's replaced in Stalin's secret police.
Okay.
Probably to save his own ass, and probably because he just didn't like the idea of Babel porking the woman that he married.
Yep.
He gives info on Babel to the new person who takes over. I think this actually might have saved his life.
Jesus.
So, Rogelio, everything we
Yes.
learned today, how do you think this is going to end? This is Stalinist Russia, now 1939.
Okay.
You want to take a wild fucking guess what happens?
Well, just based off of everything, I think not well. Well, I mean, I would like to say it would end well, but very poetically. But we are getting to the, I mean, I'm looking at the years and dates of his stories based off his stories, and I'm like, oh, I'd like to say he got out of there.
I mean,
but
it kind of ends poetically. Kind
Okay.
of. I mean, I don't know.
So it ends poetically. That's what we'll go with.
Okay, great.
Oh, jeez.
Quote, on May 15, 1939, Babel was arrested, disappeared. Not a trace, not a word. He vanished. His lodgings were searched and every scrap of paper was confiscated. Correspondence, drafts, manuscripts, everything. None of it has ever resurfaced. His name, his works were officially erased as though he never existed. There was only silence. End quote. Again, this is quoting his daughter, who was living in Paris as a young kid at the time. Her father, who she barely ever saw in her life,
Yeah.
just vanished off the face of earth.
That's not satisfying at all. I knew it wasn't gonna end well, but just vanishing. There's nothing more creepy than that to me in my book.
And it's so fucking, isn't it so
Ugh.
fucking creepy? Like,
It's so it's so sad. It's sad and just disturbing, pure disturbing.
I'll gloss over why we why we do it, because I'll talk about it now. But the only reason why we know about his lit
Yeah.
is because of the publications that that actually published his work.
Right.
Saved the previous ones, and also the Red Cavalry story was published internationally and in English too.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't know anything about his stories if he was just some Russian writer, that was living underneath the ground and was just popped in the back of the head, committed suicide by two bullets to the back of the head,
Right.
As you will. He's just he was just famous enough to do it, and his family escaped, the Soviet regime at the time. Moving on. The info provided by Yezhov, his works in film, and the rise of public scrutiny from his Red Cavalry stories are some of the reasons for Babel's arrest. He was also charged for spying for France and Austria when he met that double agent to make a film. Quote, his trial took place on January 26, 1940, in one of Lavrenti Beria's private chambers. It lasted about 20 minutes. The sentence had been prepared in advance without ambiguity. Death by firing squad, to be carried out immediately. Babel had been accused and convicted of, in quoting these accusations, active participation in an anti-Soviet Trotskyite organization, being a member of a terrorist conspiracy, as well as spying for the French and Austrian governments, end quote. He was shot the next day and thrown into a communal grave, end quote.
Wow.
Just unceremoniously, probably one of the best writers and screenplays that a country had.
Yeah.
And you can also, at the end of the day, say that the Jewish component of his life absolutely had something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's one of the wildest things I've ever heard in my life is that Marxism and left Sovietism is a leftist Jewish conspiracy, and it's guys, just a little bit of history and a little bit of context will go a fucking long way. Absolutely not. The only nation that's not true. I'm not going to say the only nation because that's absolutely not true. But one of the most profound nations in the world when it came down to the revolution of Marxism at its core, or kind of at it, fucking was one of the most anti-Semitic places in the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely fucking crazy. Yeah, whatever. My rant done. Now quoting John Updike, who's a famous American author.
Got it.
In an article he wrote for the New Yorker. Quote, he had confessed during the previous 8 months of imprisonment and interrogation to charges of espionage, but his last recorded statement protested, quote, I am innocent. I have never been a spy. I never allowed any action against the Soviet Union. I am asking only for one thing. Let me finish my work. End double quote.
I still can't go over that the disappearance thing, right? That's so... Wow.
Isn't it creepy as shit?
It is creepy as shit. And I mean, the fact that they even gave a trial to begin with is also surprising to me. It's like, why even bother at that point? Like, no one's going to... I mean, I'm amazed that we know about it. Given had the secrecy of the Soviet Union, the Russians trying to put up doing whatever they want to whoever they want, however they want.
Well, I'll tell you why we know about it really shortly. Honestly, it's pretty fascinating, actually.
Okay.
So rumors began to circulate that he might be released after a few years after WW dose, but obviously that won't happen and never did happen because he's very, very dead.
Very dead.
He's still very dead to this day. But there's some good news.
Okay.
Some good news here. Stalin does die. He's mortal. I'm
right.
Yeah, right?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If you have never watched The Death of Stalin, I'd fucking recommend it. It's one of the dark, funny humor. Fucking it's great.
All right.
But he dies on March 5, 1953. Babel is officially exonerated on December 23 the following year.
Jeez.
His death certificate. So what is that? I'm trying to figure out so 13 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
His death certificate does say that the circumstances of his death are still unknown. We only know some of the info about his death because in the 1990s, somebody hacked the Soviet computer system, or at that point it might have been the Russian computer system, and exposed a shit ton of info during the fall of the USSR.
Oh.
Just a ton of fucking Soviet documents became known worldwide.
Oh, just in time, though, because if it happened any earlier, the internet wouldn't be around. I mean, damn. And if it happened if the internet came by much later, they would have wrapped that shit up or cleaned that shit up by that point. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, it's like...
Holy shit. So information was just spilling out that way, and then it just... Man, that must have been a heyday for historians around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, even Russian historians. Imagine being a Russian trying to figure out what the fuck happened.
Oh, that's a good point, because they did hide a lot of information.
Excuse me, Soviet, too, because the Soviet Empire, Soviet Union, whatever, can say either or, it consisted of so many nations, so many ethnicities. But here's something that they found about Babel himself. Quote, a typed half sheet of ordinary paper accepted as an official document declared, quote, the sentence of the military college dated 26 January 1940 concerning Babel, i.e., is revoked on the basis of newly discovered circumstances, and the case against him is terminated in the absence of elements of a crime. Double quote. They exonerated him completely. He didn't fucking commit anything.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
A little late there.
Yeah, a little bit, but,
I mean, shit.
Damn.
He wasn't even 50 yet.
No.
So, yeah. He probably would be alive at that point. Maybe. I don't know. Russians do die pretty early with alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Random fact. I know.
Okay.
Something like a quarter to a third of all Russian men die before the age of 40 because of alcoholism.
Holy shit. So they just pickle their liver just well before? Maybe the rest of their organs while they're at it?
All of them.
Holy shit.
They're just going at it. I know, right?
Yo, what a way to go.
Russia's fucking tough.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I guess you do need to have some amount of alcohol in your body to keep from freezing, Holy shit.
Fucking wild. All right. The reason why his work began to resurface is because in the 1950s, after the death of Stalin, something called the Khrushchev thaw occurred. This was a period of time when censorship in the USSR was eased, promoted de-Stalinization and peaceful relationships with other nations, and allowed literature and art that was banished to be more accessible to the public. It didn't provide the level of freedom of press that we know and love in the West, which is still limited, but it did allow for some exonerations. Much of his work has been entirely erased. The only reason why we have the few plays and collected stories, like I said, is because the publications before. It would have been nearly impossible to destroy everything that was published because it's just fucking impossible to destroy everything that anybody's ever done.
Right.
Think about trying to go back to your old Facebook posts and trying to get rid of those.
Yeah.
and I probably don't have to look this up, but I'm willing to bet that being in possession of his literature was a crime and heavily prosecuted at the time.
Yeah, I can see that.
That was just a common thing in Soviet Russia until the thaw. His movies are largely not a revered thing. They're not really as preserved. His name was literally stripped from many of the credits in the movies because erasure.
Jesus. Right.
Yeah, right. That's the whole thing of erasure. You're just removing shit. You're removing people literally out of photos.
Yeah.
Like that's it. They're gone.
Yeah,
they didn't exist.
Back then, they were just airbrushing people out, and they did a good job at it. I mean, not that it was a good thing, but they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. At one point, one of the directors of the movie had to make a public apology to the Soviet government because the content of the film wasn't to the liking of the government. Like, that's how crazy it is to save his own fucking head.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't seen any of his movies. Can't comment. I'm not a cinephile. It's old. I'm sure they were boring at this point. But I didn't read his plays. I do enjoy reading plays, and if this thing goes on, I'll read a lot of. I'll write and talk about playwrights because some of them are fascinating. I can comment about his stories because I read his collected works. His style and point of views and everything changes from story to story. At one point he's just the story is a simple letter. Another one, it's just a description of people. Another one is an actual story, a beginning, middle, and end. Right. Something that you would think. He writes in the first person as a Cossack writer at one point, and then he can describe the interactions between a Jewish business owner and what is effectively the Odessa mob. His stories are also very fucking short. Like, the one that we quoted was only 2 pages long. Most of them aren't longer than 10 pages. Like, that's about as long as it gets that we have gotten. They're often very easy reads, can mix from being really depressing to very funny. The subject matter really just can speak to the masses. They were talking about gangsters, war, soldiers, and sex workers. This is the kind of shit that is popular today in our society. Very simply.
True. Right.
Yeah, just look at the TV series. Like, what was the last TV series you watched that wasn't a documentary, I assume?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, a lot of this stuff today, and, like, what do you call it? Any of the Amazon stuff. That's all. A spy show, right? Like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That has, what do you call it? Classic spy, Cold War espionage written all over it. That kind of stuff. And there's a lot of violence, a lot of sex in that too. So yeah, hasn't changed.
That's why he was popular. Realism. He didn't have to create fantasy or fabricate any of his work. It just was what he saw, and that was dangerous at the time in Russia. I'm going to end on a couple notes.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to end on is something to kind of go against him. He did write something called, I can't say the word because it's a racist term for a Chinese person as a title.
Got it.
And it's all about a Chinese man soliciting sex from a sex worker. It's supposed to be funny because it's an Asian person being crude to a sex worker.
Ooh.
Get it? Because that's the humor sometimes translates so well.
Right.
And
yeah.
It's fucking super indicative about how racist everybody was at the time. It didn't matter 100%. Who you are.
Yeah.
In my opinion, Babel's work, frankly, and this is completely off script, I enjoyed reading it. It's not one of my favorite things I've ever read. It's like entertaining because of his history and like understanding where he was and honestly understanding the context of this part of the world, when it was, what was going on. I am Polish. For anybody who doesn't know and listening, my parents are both immigrants, so hearing about his involvement in the Soviet-Polish War was interesting, aggravating, but I know how that war ended, so it didn't matter. And you know what? I think that one of the reasons why that I learned about this person from a Russian lit Bachelor of Arts person, somebody who got their Bachelor of Arts from Russian lit. Yeah. They loved him, and he's very famous in that circle. And I mean, John Updike, if you know anything about lit, is not like an unknown person. I quoted him earlier. He's influential, I think, because there's a lot of mystery in his life. And it's the Kurt Cobain effect, I think. What would have happened if he kept living?
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's all I could think of this whole entire time is, I think about a lot of the times, in war and when, countries are trying to silence people and erase them from history, there's so much artwork and literature that's just erased off the face of the earth. We're talking millions of pieces of art, which I never could fathom until, not too terribly long ago. And that's what I was thinking this whole time. Is like, what if those people were continued to allowed to do what they want? What if Babel, continued to write? I mean, he really wasn't writing for that long.
No.
He wasn't famous for that long, right? If he was like writing for really 20 years, especially back then, I mean, people can crank out books really fast and easily these days with all of our technology and modern logistics. But back then, I can only imagine how much more prolific. Do you have any idea how much of his stuff we're missing?
Absolutely no idea. It's a good question because I was going to mention there are two novels that completely disappeared. Pretty much.
Novel.
Yeah, they found notes and they knew that he was writing two novels. One, presumably about the Cheka, the time that when he was writing as a secret police officer, under the initial Leninist regime under well, it wasn't the Soviet Union at the point, but under the first couple of years after the revolution happened.
Yep.
And another, I think it was about his time in France as a filmmaker, but that one is actually a little less, a little more hazy. But yeah, like those are gone. Like a lot of his personal correspondence gone. Like
yeah,
the one reason why we know so much about writers is because they write. Right?
Yep.
Like,
yeah. Right. Yeah. That's true. Right. Like, I mean, that's the manifestation of their minds and thoughts and everything written on paper like that. I mean, that's pretty wild. I guess there's always be a dark figure there. How much actually was lost to history?
Yeah, and I don't think he was like the nicest guy either. Like, this is crazy to say, but he probably wasn't. I mean, I don't know. He had 3 kids with 3 women. Like, but it's just fascinating because he does live in a world that is a very clear example of glorifying somebody from the past because we don't actually know. We have made our own image based off of somebody in the past, based off of certain aspects that we believe are true.
Gotcha.
Which is, it is what it is. We're humans. We do this all the fucking time.
Yeah, we try to sympathize and think about who we would be if we went through the same things. But I guess part of reading text and interpreting it like in a academic sense, you have to be super objective and pretty careful, right? Like or not, or you have to
it's
toe
fiction,
the line, right?
It's fiction. You don't have to be super objective.
Yeah, because you have to figure out what was he actually talking about, and then I guess the reason you talk through all this to give some context to appreciate what was happening while he was writing some of this stuff.
Well, thanks, Rogelio. I know you got to get going. I still don't have the name of this podcast. What I was thinking before leaving is the intro is going to be the intro to War and Peace, our song.
Oh yeah.
So we'll figure that out when we get there. This won't be published for a bit, but
That's all right.
Cool. Talio, gentlemen.